Hello everyone, Ken and Louie here, and this is going to be a start of a new series of seeing Path of Exile builds that I have come up with that are on paper that I haven't actually made to its fullest potential. And the reason why I wanted to show these is to give you a few ideas of possible builds that you could make for yourself that I haven't for whatever reason. So the build that the title suggests is this one right here, and this build is what I've been using for the Heist League starter. So this character right here is a Chaos Inoculation Soulrend build with very high amounts of block, dodge chance on Vol Grace here, as well as pretty high physical damage reduction and blind. So on paper anyway, it says my total damage over time DPS with poisons is 2.6 million, which is kind of on the lower side, but I definitely wanted a build that had as much tankiness as I could get on a build that's actually half decent. So I was kind of more focused on that than the actual DPS part. So if you want to do like Awakener 8 Sirius or anything that has a ton of HP, this might not be the build for you. But if you want a build that is pretty tanky, as well as being immune to chaos damage, which from my experience is probably the most enjoyable thing that I have experienced in Path of Exile of lately, yes. And you doing chaos damage also. So with leveling, I pretty much go with all of the mana regen nodes as well as the energy shield nodes. So I get like Prodigal Perfection and Mystical Bulwark pretty early, and then get these nodes here for damage. For leveling, you might want to get Heart and Soul, and then maybe Arcanist Dominion by getting this point and this point, just to have enough life to get by. I didn't actually need to do that, though I was incredibly vulnerable to chaos damage while leveling, with having not much more than 1,000 life. So if I would have taken these, that would have helped a little bit, but my energy shield was actually pretty high. So I decided to go for these, as well as these chaos damage notes. I used what was it? I used a lightning skill, I do believe, before I swapped over to Soulrend for the chaos damage. So I went with this roughly around level 28 to get the damage bonus for chaos damage. So I think when I got these 4 nodes, I decided to go this way. And also this allows me to get the dexterity from here, as well as the area of effect from these 3 nodes and the spell damage. So then I went up here, get Essence Surge, Influence, and Atrophy. I didn't actually get Spellslinger yet, Serpentine Spellslinger, but I have this on here to reduce enemies' cast resistance by 5%. So considering that damage over time, for chaos damage there isn't a huge number of ways to reduce enemy chaos resistance, so that was the reasoning why I decided to get that. And then Arcane Swiftness for the shield block. And then I went down here for Growth and Decay, Soul Thief for extra energy shield, and all of these nodes down here to get dexterity and whatnot. So continuing that, I decided to go down here and then get Arcane Capacitor, so I can use Arcane Surge without needing to manually use a skill for it, Faith and Steel, and I have the Thread of Hope ready. And then I decided to get Zealot's Oath, which is a good idea before getting Chaos Inoculation. So looking at the skills, we have Soulrend with Awakened Void Manipulation, Efficacy because you double dip on the spell damage and damage over time, as well as having the skill effect duration. Awakened Swift Affliction with efficacy kind of mitigates some of the negative effects, but obviously not completely. Empower and Controlled Destruction because I'm not using crits at all. And if you need it, I have Awakened Greater Multiple Projectiles on here. And also, something to keep in mind is that the damage over time effect for Soulrend is not affected by projectile damage. So you can use this without the damage penalty. Or at least the less damage penalty. You are going to get a damage penalty for not having another damaging skill support. So for auras, I have Malevolence with alternate quality. I thought I had... Here we go. I guess I'm going to have to redo all of those at one point. All of the builds that I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be talking about 3 in this episode. I'm going to put the Path of Building links in the video description. So if you want to copy them, modify them, there they are. And in this one, since Heist League added the alternate quality for gems, I did add notes of all of the gems that I have alternate quality for, and the various different options for that I think are worth doing. So for an example, for Malevolence, having the skill effect duration, especially when you're by yourself, is a lot more effective than Air of Effect that doesn't do anything while you're by yourself. And a Soulrend obviously doesn't really do any ailments, so there we go. Vaal Discipline, that is quite a big one actually, because especially since Energy Shield is my only life, having it being able to recharge on demand like that is very nice to have. And Arctic Armor, because honestly I don't think there was really any other damaging auras that I could get, and I wanted more tankiness, and this was a way of doing it. Taking less physical damage and fire damage, as well as chilling enemies, which is important when I get to the Ascendancy, is really interesting. And then I have Clarity, because Soulrend as a 6-link costs a lot of mana, and this makes it so that mana is not an issue, as well as using the Watcher's Eye benefit. Summon Chaos Golem for the additional physical damage reduction, which you can get up to 6% with the alternate quality, or just 5%. Cast when damage taken, because the Cast Golem always wants to get killed. It pretty much never survives on its own, so having cast when damage taken, as well as possibly minion life with the minions regenerate life or a life gain on hit support, is quite important there. And then yes, there we go. So for defenses, on the other hand, with another cast when damage taken, we have Steel Skin and Tempest Shield for extra block. And with increased duration support as well as Malevolence, Tempest Shield lasts like over 20 seconds. So hopefully with the refreshing duration when you block, that is going to be up all the time. So I have Vaal Grace for 44% of the dodge. The other 5% is from the Pantheon, which I have Lunaris and Aberrath. And then Vaal Righteous Fire for extra damage. For the movement skill, I have Shield Charge with Fortify and Enduring Cry. I did put in here additional accuracy if you really want it, but ultimately Enduring Cry, this was the only area that I was able to fit it in with the other setups that I had. So there is that. Warcry speed buff effect. I think I had, I'm just going to leave skill effect duration on there. For the glove enchant, I have Commandment of Winter combined with the Ascendancy is quite strong. And I have Arcane Surge here just because I have it on the offhand, and Path of Building doesn't know how to properly calculate that, having that on, so that's why I have that there. And then on the offhand, I have a Sinvictus for Rampage, as well as having it Infused Channeling with Stormburst. So the idea was to get increased duration and efficacy to make, hopefully, Infused Channeling to last like the 12 or 14 seconds. So when I'm facing against bosses, or they're in their invincibility phases, I can cast this for 0.6 seconds and get take less damage from those even further, which would be lightning and physical. So, going to the Ascendancy, which I kind of forgot to do that earlier, I chose Void Beacon first for the extra damage, and then File Bastion for you cannot be stunned while you have Energy Shield, as well as the really nice Energy Shield regeneration. Then Withering Presence for the extra damage, as well as the free Hinder. A nice thing too is that nearby hindered enemies deal less damage over time to you. Even though that most damage over time effects are chaos damage related, so it's not as useful, but it's another nice defensive feature. And then Frigid Wake for immunity to freeze and chill, which is always nice. But the big thing is the ability to freeze chilled enemies every 4 seconds. And also, those chilled enemies do deal reduced damage to you. So there's just so many defensive layers for this build that on paper it sounds absolutely insane. And with the Watcher's Eye, I have faster recharge of Energy Shield, Spell Block, and extra maximum Energy Shield. So going to the items, Damage Wand, I kind of want to go through these a little bit quicker. Spell Block, as well as Recovering Energy Shield when you block, and having a +1 level of all cast gems. That's kind of the big things on there. Hubris Circlet Helmet, Chilling Conflux in order to chill enemies, though honestly that isn't super necessary if you have Arctic armor, but I have it on there just to hopefully proc it more often. And then nearby enemies have reduced chaos resistance, because that's one of the few ways to reduce their resistance even more. The body armor, nearby enemies are blinded, as well as gaining endurance charge every second if you've been hit recently, is very important. And then also Enduring Cry is used to basically get maximum endurance charges when facing bosses. Also with Zealot's Oath, if you use Enduring Cry level 20, you gain 2000 energy shield in a second. So that can be a good clutch skill. So yeah, definitely the blind and the endurance charge. This body armor is honestly going to be by far the toughest thing to get throughout all of this. So you might want to count this not being there unless you're really good with crafting or have a lot of currency. For the gloves, chance to block, damage over time, and Culling Strike is just kind of a nice quality of life thing. I wouldn't say it's necessary. You can put Culling Strike on the Stormburst or something if you really want. And then on the two-tone boots, additional physical damage reduction as well as maximum endurance charge, because since this doesn't crit, you can't get Tailwind or Elusive on it. And the enchantment I went with is 10% chance to freeze, shock, and ignite enemies if you haven't dealt a crit recently. And that is very important because with Awakened Controlled Destruction, you don't have any crit chance, so you're going to have 100% uptime on that effect. And then just damage, pretty much, and energy shield on the amulet and the rings. And I decided to, on paper anyway, go with faster recharge of energy shield pretty much on everything that I could put it on. And that is because when you go to the calculations, let's see here, energy shield delay is only 1 second. And when it recharges, I recharge half of my energy shield pretty much in 1 second. So if you aren't hit within 3 seconds, you get all of your energy shield back. It's absolutely crazy. So that was the idea behind those. And then for the flasks, I have Witchfire Brew to gain free Despair because I didn't know where else to put it. Dying Sun for 2 extra projectiles. That's how I can get away with not using Awakened greater multiple projectiles. Rumi's Conviction. This one's kind of a interesting one. I was originally going to use Glancing Blows, but then they nerfed Glancing Blows so that you take 65% of damage whenever you block instead of 50. And in my mind, that kind of makes Glancing Blows not really super worth getting anymore. So instead of having max block with 50% damage bleed through, I decided to use a Rumi's instead of a Granite Flask of Iron Skin, because if I used the Iron Skin Flask, this would probably be like 10,000 or a little bit over 10,000, so I would get probably that 90% physical damage reduction mark. But with the Rumi's, I get 64% block chance and 54 spell block, and I don't take any of that damage, so honestly, they probably improved my build because of that. And then a Basalt Flask, obviously, for the flat physical damage reduction, and a Silver Flask for the Onslaught. Unfortunately, though, I needed Bleed immunity somewhere, and Curse immunity, so I don't have any of Adrenaline Flasks in this setup. And then I also have a Thread of Hope down here to get Retribution, Precision, and Sanctity for the extra energy shield life regen, which is converted into energy shield regen, and this is where I get some of my attributes. The Steelwood Stance is to pretty much mitigate the loss of that Granite Flask of Iron Skin, which, I mean, it's okay, but it's not super amazing. You could probably spend it somewhere else and get a decent amount better. For the Anointment, I decided to get Deflection because that increases the defenses of your shield, which is extra energy shield, as well as adding chance to block. And it also adds chance to block projectile attack damage plus 8%, so I might actually have just about max block against projectiles. So that is the Soulrend defense-focused build. I think with 2 million DPS, you should be able to comfortably do at least tier 16 maps, but if you have like life mods or something, or mods that decrease block and whatnot, it might be difficult, but hopefully that 10,000 energy shield with everything is going to be enough to do a good job. And since I have so much less damage taken stacking for physical damage as well as fire damage with the Dying Sun Flask, you don't really take that much damage from either of those. So that's a good quality of life thing. So moving on to more damaging builds, I'm going to do the second, probably much better clearing character. So if you want more DPS, this is definitely a way to do it. It's not this one, the Tectonic Slam. There we go. So as you can see here, the damage is 22 million. And for all of these, just to make sure if anyone doesn't know, I do have it set to against Sirius. So with that, it has 22 million DPS. And also I have the Tao's Chosen skill. So technically this alpha damage here, this nearly 6 million hit, is multiplied times 2 because I do believe it copies your attack with a certain cooldown. I'm not exactly sure. So this is a chieftain with Tectonic Slam, and I have chosen Flames Advance for the conversion as well as the 100% physical damage as extra fire damage for 4 seconds. So that's why the damage is so high. So when you're looking at these damage numbers and everything, keep in mind that this is with all of the buffs on. So when you go to Soulrend, if you take off Vol Righteous Fire, it's more like roughly around 2 million or 1.8 million or so. And same thing with this. Without the Ascendancy bonus as well as the 2 totems, the DPS is probably more like 10 million. So keep that in mind. So I get Storm's Embrace for Endurance Charge stacking, Endurance Charge generation, the Death's Fury, and the Tao's Forest Strength for the Eternal one. So I have actually played this build, but I never really got super high-end gear, so I never reached anywhere close to this, of course. So key features of this build is that I do have a Cluster Jewel, but the only reason why I have the Cluster Jewel is primarily because of this disorienting display. This gives you 10% chance to blind nearby enemies when you use an elemental skill. So every time you attack, you have 10% chance of blinding them. And I'm not sure how long the duration is. It's probably 4 seconds or something. And then the fire exposure. So if you take away the blind, you can invest in like martial expertise and I think kinetic impacts, and you will get the same damage, if not more, than using the Cluster Jewel. And then I use another Thread of Hope for Sanctum of Thought, Divine Fury, Divine Judgment, and Divine Wrath for the damage as extra whatever damage. So that is quite neat. And then going down here, I do get some crit nodes and accuracy nodes because the accuracy wasn't super amazing on here, so I did need to go into a few nodes to get that. And the Watcher's Eye gives you extra armor while affected by determination and crit multi while affected by precision. That might need to be changed because they did nerf the precision 1. And also, I don't think I even use determination. That was just something that I put on there to, because Warmonger used it. Oh, actually, yes, I do have determination. Okay. So with Tectonic Slams, awakened elemental damage with attacks, awakened melee physical damage, inspiration, awakened elemental focus, which I'll get into why a little bit later, and pulverize, because this is more of a damage per hit focused build. Vol Haste, increased duration, Molten Shell, cast on damage taken, or if you want, instead of Vol Haste, Vol Grace for the dodge. And then for the totems, I have both totems, multi-totem, and then Blood Rage for the frenzy charges. For Leap Slam, I have faster attacks, fortify, and combustion. So the idea behind this is that my Leap Slam combusts the enemy to ignite them to reduce their fire resistance by 19%, and then I get the maximum damage increase from elemental focus. So that was the idea behind that, and I didn't know if I didn't take that would somehow mess this up by igniting enemies with Tectonic Slam, but this makes it so I do more damage and it's easier. If you don't want faster attacks and want to like make sure that you actually hit, I'm not sure how Fist of War affects Leap Slam because it's a movement skill, and also increased area of effect, because Leap Slam's area of effect is not super amazing. So for the body armor, I have all of my auras in there. So I have Precision, which needs to be maxed out pretty much in order to have all of the accuracy you need. Herald of Ash, Blood and Sand, Determination, Enlighten, and then I didn't know where else to put Seismic Cry on there. And then Seismic Cry does add quite a bit of extra damage as well. And then I have a Ring for Flammability. And then it doesn't really matter what your glove enchant is. On the offhand, we have Power Charge on Critical, Frenzy, as well as faster attacks. And the idea is to get power charges from there. But honestly, it's not really worth it. I mean, you get an extra like 5% damage, I guess. But I wouldn't really bother with that. That would be really just uncomfortable to use. So for weapons, I have the Flesh Ripper with crit. The big thing is damage penetration of 15% fire resistance. And I'm not sure if you need it, but there's a mod with the Warlord that gives you 10% chance to gain endurance charge on critical strike, as well as having crit on there. So if I double click here, so yeah, you get extra like local crit chance as well as the chance to gain endurance charge, and that was actually more DPS than any alternatives from what I saw. And then I've crafted attack speed and quality. And I'm using Abyssus, so for the insane damage increase, so that does make you somewhat vulnerable to physical damage, but with the endurance charge stacking and everything, it says that I do get 90% physical damage reduction. So it's not a super big deal unless you don't really have super high armor. I have also Lore Weave because pretty much everything on it is a really nice damage bonus, as well as increasing your maximum resistance by 3%. So extra tankiness is always nice. Maximum Frenzy charge on the Spike Gloves, pretty much the only thing noteworthy on that. Tailwind, and a maximum endurance charge instead of elusive. I mean, you could do elusive, but the maximum endurance charge actually gives you more AoE with Tectonic Slam, because you get yes, 5% more area of effect with each endurance charge, so that's why I decided to do that. And tankiness is always nice. So with the leather belt, gain a flash charge when you deal a critical strike, and that is very important because at Series Promise and Lion's Roar, as well as Cinder Swallow, pretty much is most of your damage here. So you have to find a way of getting those back, even against bosses without minions. So with the Coral Ring, crit strike multi and melee damage, as well as elemental damage with attacks, is quite nice. And then basically the same thing here, except with some chaos resistance. So with that Series Promise, as you can see here, I think that's 1.6 million from that alone, and 2.6 million from Cinder Swallow, and 4.4 million from Lion's Roar. So having those flasks up is definitely insanely important, as well as the diamond flask. So without these flasks, if we take off all of the bonuses from the Ascendancy and everything, and the totems, that goes down to like maybe 10 million, and if you take away all the flasks, you're probably only doing like 5 million or 3 to 5 million damage. So do keep that in mind, that these flasks, if you can't keep them up, that's going to really hamper your potential damage there. And then on here I have crit chance, crit multi, damage penetrates 10% fire resistance. So pretty much getting enough pen to hopefully remove all of the boss fire resistance. And then I have Sinvicta's in the offhand for the Rampage. Third of Hope, and then Watcher's Eye. So yeah. So this build I thoroughly enjoyed. The rework of all of the slam skills, and Tectonic Slam is really nice to use. So if you're looking for something that has those big hits, this build might potentially be for you. But again, if you can't get the optimal gear on here, as well as if you can't keep up your flasks, the damage potential of this is a lot lower than you might expect, especially considering how high it is with all of the bonuses active. And then with the Seismic Cry, the Call to Arms is used to make it so that it's up whenever it's available. Instead of, I mean, you could use something like Enduring Cry on there instead, but Seismic Cry with Call to Arms on the left mouse button is very handy. So yeah. I'm not sure if I mentioned this before. I don't think I did. All of these are also planned for level 100, so do keep that in mind if you don't plan to get to 100, or you've never gotten to 100 like me. You're gonna have to take away nodes from somewhere in order to be like more of a level 90 tree. So the last build that I'm going to look at today is a Cobra Lash Pathfinder with claws. So going into the Ascendancy, getting obviously the Chaos damage nodes, which are actually a lot stronger than I looked at before I was playing this build. This was this and the Tectonic Slam character were builds that I used as a leak starter for Harvest. So unfortunately I never really took these to the max because it was hard for Warmonger to get the items, and I kind of was burnt out within like 2 or 3 weeks of the league anyway. So anyway, going back into this, we get Master Toxicist for the extra damage, and you just get so much damage from the poisons you inflict during any flask effect, which is going to be all the time with Nature's Boon. You gain 40% chance to deal double damage. That is just huge, and when you get a certain craft on your claws, or I think daggers can get this too, you can get 60% chance for poisons to deal 100% more damage. So with that, you gain double damage 100% of the time. It's phenomenal. So I got these 4 first, and then Nature's Boon, and then Nature's Adrenaline. And you could definitely swap Nature's Adrenaline if you don't want it to gain Master Alchemist for the immunity to elemental ailments. Is a really nice benefit. So if you want more tankiness, that's an option. And then I think these other 2 are not very useful. So that's what I went with. So the noteworthy things is that I do try to get a decent amount of crit chance, but it's not super amazing. And if I could get Dire Torment, that definitely would have been a nice thing to have, but it was just a little bit too far away for me to allocate into it. And the anointment that I chose is Dirty Techniques, and that is because it increases the duration as well as making it deal damage faster. So it kind of negates its disbenefit, and then a damage over time multiplier, which is really nice. So I pretty much gain all of the poison nodes, like Swift Victims, Swift Venoms, Toxic Strikes, and everything, as well as a Frenzy Charge whenever I can, as well as power charges. So going into the skills, I have Cobra Lash, Awakened Vicious Projectiles for the chaos damage over time, added Awakened Chaos Damage to increase the damage of the hit, which affects the poison, Awakened Unbound Ailments, Awakened Deadly Ailments, and Vile Toxins. If you need it, Awakened Greater Multiple Projectiles is there, or Dying Sun is also an option, just like the Soulrend build. What I was trying to do with this is get the enchantment for Cobra Lash chains 3 additional times, and I thought to myself that hopefully that would be good enough for clearing, but I never got it, so I can't really vouch for that. And also you could get projectiles deal damage for each remaining chain for single target damage, or increased chaining range for the alternate quality if you want. So for the auras, I have Vol Discipline, Enlightened, Herald of Agony, and Malevolence. And then I have Despair, Awakened Blasphemy, Precision, and Smoke Mine for movement skill. I think I do have 2 movement skills just because just like on the Soulrend build, I had one that could move through gaps and one that doesn't. And this is incorrect. Just put steel skin there. This was before I got too lazy to stop naming stuff, so yeah. And then I have Ancestral Protector for more attack speed. So without that, I do lose quite a bit of DPS. Blood Rage for the Frenzy Charges. Plague Bearer is also a pretty big damage dealer, because it pretty much, once you get to maps, it fills up just about instantly. And it does deal decent damage in a pinch, so that's pretty decent. Steel Skin with cast when damage taken, as well as Vol Haste if you need it, with increased duration. Then I have Whirling Blades Fortify in faster attacks. On the offhand, I have Frenzy with Power Charge on critical, and Inspiration with Barrage, which is really awkward. I'm just thinking that any build that forces you to swap weapons is not really a good idea. Not ideal. So for the calculations, I do have power charges on here, so I'm not sure if you would really want to count that in or not. And then on here I have Warmonger extras. The idea was to have Warmonger do Wither, and as you can see here, Wither just about doubles the damage that I deal. So if you can fit Wither in there, so for an example, if you don't care about Fortify, because honestly using Whirling Blades on a range skill like Cobra Lash is kinda useless in all intents and purposes. So honestly I would probably swap this out for the Withering, and that it's just amazing to me how much you get from that. So that's definitely worth noting. So in the calculation, in the configuration, probably take that off, as well as maybe leave the Frenzy Charges on there, and then have Wither on there, and then take off Whirling Blades or something. And then you lose Fortify, which you might not get in the first place, for hopefully double the damage. So however you want to configure that. So, for the items, the claws are actually very expensive are very troublesome to make. So, these are kind of like harvest expectations worth of weapons, so you might want to tone these down a bit. Unless, again, you have a ton of currency or you are very good with crafting. And the survivability helmet, Dunderbait for the poison duration, as well as the increased damage with poison, as well as lesser poison, which adds a little bit of flat chaos damage, I do believe. So there's that. Chaos damage over time multiplier, as well as maximum frenzy charges for the gloves. Tailwind and elusive boots, a classic. And this item right here, in presence, is how I am able to use despair with awakened blasphemy without really any problems. And also, everything else that this build does is it benefits. These are pretty optimistic. This adds accuracy, cast damage, will affected by Herald of Agony and crit multi, as well as Herald of Agony has increased buff effect. These I think were also nerfed by quite a bit, so I'm not sure if you want to really invest in these. You might be able to get rings that have a decent amount of benefit to damage as well. Like, these add like 5 million DPS, like pre-nerf, so you might not want to use those. And I'm not sure if there's really rings that affect poison enough, but do keep that in mind. This is definitely more of a glass cannon build, especially compared to my other builds. Like on here I have 1300 energy shield and 3700 life, but I don't really have any other like damage reduction effects. Like I only have evasion and a tiny bit of block, and that's it. And then the Watcher's Eye is also very optimistic with energy shield gain on hit, as well as damage over time multiplier ×2. So again, you probably want to swap this out for something else that's a little bit more realistic. And then I have Coralito's Signature, which adds quite a bit of DPS, because not only is it a diamond flask, but it adds Herald of Agony for free. So it gives me quite a bit of poison damage. Jade Flask and Basalt Flask, as well as a Silver Flask for quality of life stuff. And then the belt, just get as much survivability as you can. I know that the resistances are not maxed on here, but we can probably do like plus 5% here, plus 5% here. Save that, and then Cold and Lightning. And I personally don't think that Tier 3 is really that unrealistic. So I'm sure you can max out the resistances. Like that. So yeah, these are the 3 builds that I wanted to show off in this at the start of the series. So hopefully I give you a few ideas. It's within like the first 2 weeks of harvest, so if you want something different than your League starter, perhaps some of these piqued your interest. Personally, I think out of all 3 of them, if you can get the gear, I do think that the Marauder is probably the best one out of all of them, because you have overmaxed resistance, hopefully maxed out physical damage reduction, as well as having by far the highest damage out of all 3 of them. and besides maybe the axe, I don't think the rest of these items are super expensive, besides maybe the Cinder Swallow. I think Cinder Swallows are typically a little bit more expensive. And obviously the Watcher's Eye. Yeah. But I think this one's probably the best one overall. But if you want something that has a lot more survivability and you just don't want to deal with chaos damage at all, I think that is definitely what the Soulrend is for. And so far, this build, trying it out, or at least the budget version of it, I guess, has been very enjoyable. So, yeah. With that, like I said, hopefully some of these piqued your interest, or something along those lines, gave you some different ideas. And again, do keep these numbers that each of these have with a huge grain of salt, because these are like complete endgame crafted builds that also have all of their buffs up. So without some of these buffs, the damage numbers, like I mentioned before with the Marauder, it might only be 3 to 5 million if you don't have your totems up, if you don't have your flasks up and whatnot. So do keep that in mind. But with that, thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.